Welcome to your deep dive. This one is built just for excerpts you sent over from Because Naughty Girls Need Love Too. That's why.
Okay.
We're going to be exploring some seriously raw and honest reflections as the author kind of goes on this journey of addiction self-discovery and makes a few choices that'll raise some eyebrows along the way.
Yeah, it's really a fascinating look at how she kind of sees herself and battles these inner demons and ultimately tries to connect with others
Right.
in this world that seems to be so increasingly, digitized.
Yeah, and the piece starts with her just painting her son's room,
Oh, wow.
which sounds,
Pretty normal.
pretty normal, but at the same time, she's wrestling with this intense guilt about her past choices and even questioning her own sanity.
Right.
It gets pretty deep pretty fast.
Yeah, and that question that she keeps asking herself, am I evil?
Yeah.
I think that's a really important point to unpack because it reveals so much about her internal struggle.
Yeah, it's definitely not your typical thought process while you're, doing a little home decorating.
Yep.
What do you think that question suggests about her state of mind?
Well, I think it points to, a really deep sense of shame and self-judgment. She's clearly carrying a lot of baggage from her past, struggling to kind of reconcile those actions with her own sense of morality.
So it's not even just about whether she's a good or bad person. It's about dealing with the repercussions of her choices and how they really shaped her identity.
Exactly. And I think it's this, internal conflict that leads her to disassociate, which she ultimately connects to her addiction.
Yeah, that's a really interesting link. She actually says that for her, addiction is about wanting to disassociate. So it's less about the substance itself and more about escaping her own mind.
It seems that way. And what's even more intriguing is that she talks about using drugs to reacquire herself, to bring myself home.
Wow.
It's almost as if she gets so lost in this disassociation that she needs these drugs to feel whole again.
That almost flips the script on how we typically view addiction. It's not just seeking pleasure or numbing pain, but a way to connect with herself, even if it's in a distorted way.
It really does challenge that conventional narrative, and it raises all these questions about what drives people to seek escape in the first place.
Right.
What are they trying to disconnect from? What are they longing to reconnect with?
Yeah, it makes you wonder if some forms of addiction could be a symptom of a deeper underlying need for self-connection and acceptance.
That's a really insightful way to look at it, and I think it's something worth pondering, especially in light of the author's later explorations into pushing boundaries and connecting with others in this digital realm.
Which, speaking of things, take a pretty wild turn when she recounts her experience on an acid trip.
Oh, wow.
What were your takeaways from that part of the piece?
What stood out to me was her initial reaction coming down from the trip. Fear and disgust. It was like she was forced to confront something incredibly disturbing, something she wasn't at all prepared to see.
Almost like she felt violated by the experience, right? She was shown something she didn't consent to seeing.
Yeah, that's a very powerful way to put it. And I think what makes it even more impactful is that she realizes the darkness she saw wasn't external. It
Wow.
was her own.
So the trip acted as a sort of mirror, reflecting back her own internal struggles and these hidden parts of herself.
Precisely. And it really seems like it had a profound impact on her, even though she struggled to articulate exactly what she went through.
Yeah, it seems like those kinds of experiences can be so overwhelming that words just can't fully capture them. Did you find that this intense experience tied into her desire to connect with others later on?
There's definitely a thread there. It's like this experience, as difficult as it was, opened up this new level of awareness for her, both about herself and the nature of connection. It's almost as if she went through this really intense internal journey, and now she's searching for a way to bridge that internal world with the external world.
So the acid trip, in a way, became a catalyst for her exploration of relationships and how we connect with each other.
I think that's a very insightful observation.
Okay.
It's like she's trying to make sense of this newfound awareness and integrate it into her life. And that leads her to some fairly unconventional ways of connecting with others.
And that brings us to the next part of her story, where she starts to explore pushing boundaries both personally and digitally.
Exactly. This is where we see her interest in stripping and cam work, which on the surface
Right.
might seem totally unrelated to her internal struggles, but I think there's a deeper connection there. This
Yeah.
desire to explore, different facets of herself and challenge societal norms.
It's like she's saying, okay, I've faced my inner demons. Now I'm going to face the world's expectations and see what happens.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that she doesn't frame these experiences as reckless or self-destructive. Instead, she sees them as opportunities for self-discovery and learning.
So how does her interest in coding fit into this larger picture of self-discovery and connection?
Right.
You mentioned earlier that she's interested in connecting with others digitally, and it seems like code plays a role in that.
Absolutely. She sees code not just as a technical skill, but as a form of communication in this increasingly digital world. Remember how she talks about uploading ourselves to the next dimension?
Right.
She's fascinated by the potential of technology to connect us in new and innovative ways.
It's like she's trying to decode the language of the digital world, not
Because-
just to understand it, but to participate in it on her own terms.
And that ties into her interest in cam work.
Right.
It's not just about the performative aspect.
Okay.
It's about exploring online communication and the way we present ourselves in these digital spaces.
It's about playing with the boundaries of intimacy and vulnerability in a world that's increasingly mediated by technology.
Exactly. And that's what makes her story so compelling. She's not just a passive observer of these changes. She's actively engaging with them, trying to figure out how to navigate this new landscape and find genuine connection in the process.
She's definitely not afraid to push the envelope and challenge the status quo.
And that willingness to experiment and push boundaries is what leads her to some truly fascinating insights about the nature of connection in the digital age.
So let's dive into those insights. What does she learn from her forays into stripping cam work and coding? And how do these experiences shape her understanding of human connection in this rapidly changing world?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that connection, even in the digital space, is still about vulnerability. It's about being willing to show up as your authentic self, even if that means pushing past your comfort zone.
That's really interesting because she talks about stripping and cam work as ways to challenge those societal norms and explore these different facets of herself. It almost sounds like she's using these experiences as a form of personal research.
Right. It's like she's conducting her own experiment on how people connect both online and offline. And what she discovers is that even in a virtual setting, people are still drawn to that authenticity, to real human connection.
And she even connects this idea to her interest in code, which
Yeah.
is pretty fascinating. She seems to see code as a way to break down these barriers and create these new avenues for communication.
Exactly. It's like she's saying, if we can learn to speak the language of technology, then we can use it to connect with each other in deeper and more meaningful ways.
So she's not just interested in the technical aspects of coding, she's interested in the human potential of technology.
Absolutely. And that's what sets her apart from a lot of these tech enthusiasts. She's not just focused on the gadgets and the algorithms.
Right.
She's focused on the people and the connections that technology can facilitate.
And she seems to be particularly interested in the games that we play around sex relationships and vulnerability in the digital space. What do you think she's trying to say with this concept of games?
I think she's pointing out that even in a digital world, we're still playing by certain rules and expectations. There are these unwritten codes of conduct, social cues, and unspoken assumptions that shape how we interact online.
So it's like we're taking the complexities of human relationships and just layering on this whole new level of digital interaction. That sounds like a recipe for both amazing connection and potential disaster.
Exactly. And I think that's what she's trying to grapple with. She's exploring these digital spaces with a critical eye,
Right.
trying to understand the rules of the game and how they impact our ability to connect authentically.
And she's not just observing. She's actively participating, right?
Yeah.
She's putting herself out there experimenting with different ways of connecting and seeing what works and what doesn't.
That's what makes her perspective so valuable. She's not just theorizing about these issues,
Right,
she's
yeah.
living them, learning from them, and sharing her insights with the world.
It's like she's a digital anthropologist,
Yeah.
studying the rituals and behaviors of this emerging online culture.
And her research is leading to some really thought-provoking conclusions about the nature of human connection in the 21st century.
So what are some of the key takeaways from her research? What's she learning about connection in this increasingly digitized world?
Well, one thing she emphasizes is the importance of intentionality. In a world where we're constantly bombarded with information and stimulation, it's easy to get lost in the noise and lose sight of what really matters. She's encouraging us to be more mindful of the connections we're making both online and offline.
That makes sense. It's like she's saying, don't just let technology dictate how you connect with others. Choose your connections consciously and deliberately.
Exactly. And that ties into her idea of choosing the games we want to play. It's about recognizing that we have agency in how we engage with technology and the connections we choose to cultivate.
It's about taking ownership of our digital lives
Yeah.
and using technology as a tool for connection rather than letting it control us.
And that brings us back to her central theme of self-discovery.
Right.
It's like she's saying, if you want to connect authentically with others, you need to first understand yourself and what you're looking for in a connection.
So self-awareness is the foundation for meaningful connection, both online and offline.
I think that's a great way to put it, and I think that's one of the most powerful messages in this whole piece.
Right.
It's not just about mastering the technical aspects of digital communication.
Right.
It's about developing the emotional intelligence and self-awareness necessary to navigate the complexities of human connection in any context.
That's a really important point, especially in a world where technology is evolving at such a rapid pace. It's like we need to develop new skills and strategies to adapt to this ever-changing landscape of connection.
Absolutely. And I think the author's offering us a roadmap for doing just that.
Right.
She's encouraging us to be curious, to experiment, and to find our own unique ways of connecting in a world that's becoming increasingly complex and interconnected.
It's like she's saying, don't be afraid to break the mold, to
Yeah.
challenge the rules, and to create your own path to connection.
And I think that's a really empowering message, especially for those of us who feel overwhelmed or lost in this digital age. It reminds us that we have the power to shape our own experiences and create the connections we crave.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this piece,
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the key takeaways you want to leave our listener with? What are the big ideas that they can apply to their own lives?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that self-discovery and connection are like totally linked. You can't really truly connect with others until you understand yourself and what you're even looking for in a relationship.
Yeah, and that self-discovery is a journey, not a destination. It's about being willing to explore, to experiment, and to kind of embrace the unknown.
And it's about recognizing that there's no one right way to connect. What works for one person might not work for another, and that's okay.
So it's about finding what works for you and being open to new possibilities.
Exactly. And I think that's a really hopeful message. It reminds us that even in a world that feels increasingly fragmented and disconnected, there's still hope for genuine human connection.
And that connection starts with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
It all comes back to that idea of self-awareness as that foundation for meaningful connection. It's like she's encouraging us to really understand our own needs, desires, and motivations before we can truly connect with others.
And she even takes it a step further by framing those online interactions as games. Remember how she talks about choosing the games we want to play?
Right.
I think that's such a brilliant way to think about it. It implies a sense of agency and control, even in these digital spaces that can often feel overwhelming and chaotic.
Right. It's like she's saying, don't just be a passive player in someone else's game.
Yeah.
Create your own rules, set your own boundaries, and choose the experiences that align with your values.
Exactly. And that's what makes her approach to self-discovery so refreshing. She's not afraid to break the mold and challenge conventional wisdom. She's encouraging us to be more playful, more experimental, and more intentional in how we connect with the world around us.
And she seems to be suggesting that this playful, experimental approach can lead to some pretty profound insights. It's like the more we're willing to push our own boundaries and step outside of our comfort zones, the more we discover about ourselves and the nature of connection.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really empowering message for anyone who's feeling lost or disconnected in this digital age. It's a reminder that we have more control over our experiences than we might realize. We have the power to choose the games we want to play, the connections we want to cultivate, and the reality we want to create.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this piece, what final thought would you leave with our listener? What's the one thing you hope they take away from this exploration?
If life is a game, choose your games wisely. Play the ones that bring you joy, challenge you to grow and connect you with others in meaningful ways. And don't be afraid to walk away from the games that no longer serve you.
That's such a powerful message to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking.